Well, thank you again, Matt. Well, brothers and sisters and young people and friends, we've now come to have a look at Joshua 8 and 9. Now, these two chapters are very important because they actually carry on from where we left off in our last study, the redemption of Israel, but not just the Jews in the land post-Armageddon, the redemption of all the Jews, those that Elijah will have to deal with outside the land as well. We're going to see them incorporated into the wonderful type that is presented here in Joshua 8 and 9. There's some quite startling things in here, as you're going to see. So, will you join me in Joshua chapter 8? You're familiar with this record because after the disaster of chapter 7, where, of course, you have the defeat of the 3,000 men of Israel who went up against Ai, and they came back with their tail between their legs, and there was huge distress in the nation. And then we had that sorting out, the cleansing of the family of Judah, which we saw as a type of the cleansing of those Jews who survived the events of Armageddon. Well, what comes after that, do you think? Well, let's have a look. This is the context of the type. So after the terrible sufferings of the Gogian invasion and Armageddon, the refined third of Judah will get involved in the aftermath, and they will actually fight. Now that prophecy is given to us in Zechariah 14 and verse 14, which says, and this is clearly post-Armageddon, post the events of the splitting of the mountain, etc., and Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem. And the result of Judah, this is the refined third of Judah, fighting will be that the wealth of all the nations round about shall be gathered together. Now notice this. It says the wealth of all the nations round about. What does that suggest to you? Well, this is not the immediate events of Armageddon, the splitting of the mountain and the decimation of the Gogian Confederacy, is it? This is actually post that. It's after that. It's when these refined third of Judah have been cleansed. This might take months to do so. They're prepared as an army, and then they're sent out, or at least they go out with the saints, to begin the process of suppressing the nations who are near at hand. Now all of this is, I'm not putting this into this study, but if you ever get to have a look at the studies on Yahweh versus, or Yahweh will destroy Nimrod, which were mentioned earlier today, you'll see that this is actually what is going to happen. In actual fact, in Daniel chapter 2, the order of the destruction of the metals is telling you the way in which that 40 years of judgments post-Armageddon will unfold. Can I ask you the question, which is the last metal to be destroyed in Daniel chapter 2? Gold? Yeah, the head of gold. So who's the last power that Christ and the saints destroy in that 40 years of battle? Babylon, the Great. What was the symbol in the image of Nebuchadnezzar? The head of gold, okay? Well, guess what comes second after the iron and the clay are dealt with, because they're the feet, you see, the image is smashed on the feet. The iron there, of course, represents the representative of the Roman system, which is Gog in the land, see? He's come from Constantinople, or Istanbul as it's called today. He's the second leg, the second iron leg, you might say, okay? Well, who comes next? Silver. Wonder why? Well, you see, the silver was the Medo-Persian Empire. It represents that area immediately around the nation of Israel. So what will Christ do? Well, he'll do what David did. What did David do? Well, you deal with the immediate nations outside your boundary. All right, that's what David did, and that's what Christ will do. So having established his power in the land, he will then use the Jews who have been purified in his warfare against the surrounding nations who refuse to submit to him. He'll deal with them first. So even the order of the destruction of Nebuchadnezzar's image in Daniel chapter 2 is very, very useful in that regard. The point being made here, of course, is that these purified Jews, having to go out now to fight, will suppress those surrounding nations, and they will collect the gold and silver and apparel in great abundance, which is going to be used, of course, in the building of the temple, etc. So it's clearly after the great earthquake and the revelation of Christ to the surviving Jews in the land. That's that prophecy of Zechariah 14 verse 14. I'm going to come back to that one once or twice more as we proceed. Now I'm going to put this chart up because this chart will hopefully, when your eyes settle upon it, and many of you have seen this before a number of times, so it's not going to be new to many of you. This chart actually sets out the 50-year Jubilee period from the time that Christ returns to raise the dead through the time when he has universal control and rule over all the earth. And the earth will be at peace for a while. So you break this 50-year period up into two parts. We know that the judgments will be 40 years from the time of Armageddon to the time that he assumes full control. That leaves 10 years, of course, up front here for the work of the resurrection, the judgment seat, the marriage and the rejoicing and the preparation of the saints and the work of Elijah that begins 3.5 years prior to Armageddon, and so on and so forth. Okay? That's what happens in that 10 years. Now when Armageddon occurs, what's the first thing that Christ does? Sets up the throne of David at the foot of the newly exalted Mount Zion. Well, nothing there, of course. No temple there. It'll take 40 years to build. But he actually deals with the Jews that survive. Judah's saved. And they will be settled, of course, in the land over time. God will be buried. But you see, also will have sent out many saints to deliver what's called the mid-heaven proclamation. To speak to rulers and to ruled and to demand their submission. Now some of them, of course, will submit, sensible nations like Britain, Australia and Canada and probably America. Sensible nations will submit, but other nations won't. And they're going to have to be suppressed. This is where this refined herd of Judah get involved, in the battles that we fought in this period after Armageddon. That's Zechariah 14 and verse 14. Okay, so it's important to understand what's going to happen. A lot of things happening together. This is why you've got this chart, all these things, because a lot of things happening concurrently in the events after Armageddon. Now, one of the things that's happening, of course, is that Elijah, having begun his work prior to Armageddon in warning the Jews that they're going to get what's called scripturally the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, which is in fact a reference to Armageddon, when they get that sign, of course, they'll have no reason to ignore it anymore, because there'll be nothing for the Jews to stay for. The earthquake at Armageddon is going to destroy, completely wreck the infrastructure of the world, and if the geologists have got it right, there won't be 1 2-storey building standing anywhere on earth, and most of the cities that we know in the world today will be out in the sea because the tsunamis will have carried them out into the sea. All right, it'll be gone. There'll be no reason for those who survived those events, the Jews particularly, to stay where they are. No banks, no money, no swimming pools, no Cadillacs, nothing like that. That's all gone. All right. So Elijah won't have too much problem post-Armageddon of getting the Jews who are scattered throughout the earth to respond. And he'll send the saints out and they'll collect them. It'll take him about 10 years, but he'll get them eventually into what's called the wilderness of the peoples. And this second Exodus is going to take 40 years. But when he gets into the wilderness of the peoples, the Catholic system is going to be in complete and utter rebellion against Christ. We want to talk about that, and we want to see that here from the book of Joshua. And he's going to use these Jews coming back through the wilderness of the peoples, namely Europe, as the weapon against these Catholic nations of Europe who will be resisting the rule of Christ. Now, of course, you need to have a little bit of a knowledge of the events subsequent to the return of Christ, a bit of a framework like that to make sense of the type. But when you come to the type, guess what? Perfect match. Absolutely perfect match. That's why I said you know you're right. You know the framework's right when you find the type matches it perfectly. So that's a little bit of the matching, shall we? But first, we need to get one thing straight. Now, I probably sound like a broken record to some of you, but I'm going to continue to sound like one. Because on the principle of recency and frequency, I want this message to get through. We have writings in our community today that are not correct on certain elements of they don't get this rule right. The rule is very simple. When the people, that is the people of the Jews, all right, when the people are the subject, not the land, this is the principle that applies in prophetic interpretation. Israel, Ephraim and the remnant of Jacob are the names used for Jews who are outside the land at the return of Christ. Now I can prove that, I can nail that down so you'll never get it off the floor, all right, scripturally. And I challenge people. I've been doing this for nearly 30 years. I challenge you to, if you haven't been doing this, start it now. When you're reading the prophetic scriptures, and we're doing it right now, we've just been through Ezekiel, we're now in Daniel. When you're reading the prophetic scriptures, test it. You'll find the context will demonstrate to you every single time that when the prophecy is about latter-day events, these terms, Israel, Ephraim, the remnant of Judah, is always about the Jews who are outside the land. All right? Always. But the name Judah refers to the Jews in the land at Christ's return. And it's invariable. There's only one possible, and you can show why it's seeming difficulty, and that's in Isaiah 11, when it talks about Judah coming back from the land of the north, etc. Well, of course, because Gog's going to take Jews from the land. You know, when Gog's victorious, we're told in Zechariah 14, they take captives out of the land. Where are they going to take them? Well, back to Russia. Yeah, the land of the north. Because 1.5 million Jews came out of Russia in the 1990s. The intelligentsia walked out of Russia in the 1990s. That's why they're going to take it back. Some of them anyway. So that's why Isaiah 11 says that. But there are no exceptions to this rule. Now don't get mixed up with the land, because when Gog comes down upon what? The mountains of Israel. Of course the land's called Israel. Of course the nation's called Israel, but God doesn't call them. The Jews, He does not call the people in the land Israel. He calls the land Israel. It's the nation of Israel today. They're in the United Nations. It's the nation of Israel. But God doesn't use that terminology. The Jews in the land are always Judah. Alright? Now that might have gone on, I might have raved on there for too long, but I'm hoping that will eventually, the penny will drop. That message will get through in our community, because we're getting wrong interpretations. Because that's not understood. And I can show you them in print, so I know they're out there. So here we've got a principle. Talking about the people, Jews in the land are always Judah. Jews outside the land of Armageddon, always Israel, Ephraim, or the remnant of Jacob. So this is what I'm going to cover in this session. Cover chapter 8 and chapter 9. Now Joshua 8 is about Ai being defeated. Purified Judah, this is the type, purified Judah, the Jews in the land, victorious over the surrounding nations, and all Israel ultimately, through the work of Elijah, enter into a new covenant. That's what Joshua chapter 8 presents. So let's march into it, shall we? Joshua chapter 8 verse 1. And Yahweh said unto Joshua, Fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Take all the people of war with thee, and arise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into thy hand the king of Ai and his people, and his city and his land. Thou shalt do to Ai her king as thou didst to Jericho, etc. Notice it says this, take all the people. Who's taking them? Well, Joshua. But Joshua didn't go up, did they? When they went up in chapter 7, he sent 3,000 up. Joshua stayed in the camp. Yeah. And they were humbled and humiliated by defeat. Yeah. Well, you see, Joshua here's a type of Christ, isn't he? What this is telling us, brothers and sisters, is that the Jews are going to be humbled and defeated by the Gogian Confederacy, aren't they? And then greatly humbled by the great earthquake. Yeah. Christ won't be there in their midst. But now we see in Joshua 8 verse 1, who? Who's going up with them? Who's leading them? Yahshua. Yeah. So here's Christ leading an army. Right? That's what that's telling us. Joshua wasn't there for the first disastrous campaign against Ai. But the second campaign is a type of Zechariah 14 verse 14. Remember? Judah shall fight in that day at Jerusalem. Well, who's going to organise them? Well, Christ. He will have just purified them. We've spent months purifying them. He's going to organise them into an army. I'm going to use them against the surrounding nations to bring the wealth of those nations into his land. Got a picture? It's very, very precise. And verse 2 of Joshua 8 tells us this. And thou shalt do to Ai, and the spoil thereof, and the cattle thereof shall ye take for a prey unto yourselves, land ambush, etc. Well, the spoil fell to Israel as it will to Judah in Zechariah 14 verse 14. So the type here is about what's going to happen when Judah fights at Jerusalem, as we've seen. Now, most of you are familiar with the story of what happens in Joshua chapter 8 as to how he sets an ambush. We were told that in verse 2, he has to set an ambush. Now, I had a little video of our trip to Israel 2010, which is too difficult to show on this because we're broadcasting this. So I'm not going to show you the video, so I'm going to spend a bit more time in the absence of that video just talking about what happens here. We actually went to this place, and a group of 8 of us stood on this Tel Hai just 4 years ago, and in fact we went all over this place and went to, see Bay Tin up here, it might be too hard to see. Bay Tin is Bethel, okay, so that's where Abraham went. In fact, he was in between. See this road here, Highway 60? That goes along the central massif of the land. This is the mountains of Israel through here. See, and they built the highway, of course, up on high ground. Well, to the west of it, you've got Bethel, which is a little mound, like a hill. And over here, to the east of it, you've got Hai. And down below Hai is a town called Dibwan. It's a Palestinian town. A lot of nice houses in Dibwan, by the way. So we went here. Now, you might notice this here, this is the Valley of Achor. You get a bit of an idea, the dark areas are the tops of the hills. And this is the Valley of Achor. And what Joshua did was this, without going into all the details of the chapter, he brought 30,000 men and he made them come along the bottom of this valley. Now if you stay down the bottom of the valley, nobody can see you from Hai. We stood there. You can't see. It goes over, it drops over into the valley. You can't see what's happening down there. So 30,000 men could creep around, and they come around here to the west. And over to the west, same thing. It goes over the ridge and you can't see. But there are people there. But Joshua also brought the rest of the army of Israel, and he put them in sight. So looking northwards from Hai, you look out over here, he's got the army over on the opposite hillside, over the valley. He's got them over on the other side. You can see them, see? So the king of Ai looked at it, he says, oh, there they are. But he couldn't see the 30,000 set in ambush. And what happened was this, of course, he streamed out of the city. He actually had the king of Bethel with him. So a lot of soldiers from Bethel had come and joined him. He streamed out of the city and he came down and they met. They met down here probably in the valley, and of course Israel, they fled just to draw them away from the city. And then when they were far enough away, Joshua gives the signal and the 30,000 come up, they take the city. They left the gates open, the idiots. You're right? They go in and set the place on fire. So that's how it happens. Now you know the story of that. That's the record. You have it in Joshua chapter 8. Well, it's all typical. All right? It's all typical. There are 2 stages, as we pointed out a little earlier. 2 stages of deliverance of Jacob. Now who's involved in this battle? There's the king of Ai and there's the king of Bethel. What's Bethel mean? Yeah, there is an organisation post-Armageddon who will still claim to be the house of God. Catholicism. True? Yeah. So you've got Ai and Bethel. You've got the political powers, you've got the religious powers. All right, this is all about what Christ and the saints are going to have to clean up post-Armageddon. They're going to use the Jews to do this. Judah shall fight at Jerusalem. That's for the immediate surrounding nations. But of course, Elijah, as I pointed out, is also going to have the Jews in Europe. The heart of this rebellion against Christ's rule. He's going to use them as the weapon against Babylon the Great. Overshadowed by the saints as they will be. So there are 2 stages to the deliverance of Jacob. Jacob being a term that you can apply to the whole nation. You remember Romans 11:26. What does it say? And the Redeemer shall come to Zion and turn away ungodliness from who? Jacob. It's the whole people. 2 stages of that work. You've got Christ saving the tents of Judah first, immediately after Armageddon. We've spoken enough about that, I think. And you've got Elijah leading the second Exodus for 40 years to recover all the Jews who are outside the land. All right, so there are your 2 stages. Judah saved back here. This is Armageddon here. Now, Elijah began his work prior to Armageddon, so he gave them a warning, see? Judah saved post-Armageddon, and then you've got the second Exodus. This is the period when Israel will be used as a weapon against the rebellion of the papal system in Europe. Now, it'd be lovely to have time to go through all the details and explain you the wilderness of the peoples, but that's another subject. You're just going to have to accept what I've said thus far. But here's a summary. Here's a summary in map form. This is the second Exodus, 40 years under Elijah's leadership. It takes him probably nearly 10 years to get all the Jews. They've got to come from the land of the north and come from all countries on earth, all right? Take him a long time to get them here. But when he gets them there, he gets them into the wilderness of the peoples, it's called in Ezekiel chapter 20. Now, there is only one wilderness of the peoples. Search your Bible. There's only one. It's the one in Revelation 17 verse 3. Where a woman sits upon a scarlet-coloured beast on a sea, which is called a wilderness. Yeah. And the sea is what? Verse 15, Revelation 17 tells you. Peoples, nations, tongues. Alright? So the sea represents peoples and nations and tongues. Is a woman in a wilderness. It's a sea. Yeah. Wilderness of peoples. Where's that? Europe. That's where the rebellion against Christ's rule will happen. The Pope will have all of these European nations in his pocket. That's why it says in Revelation chapter 17 verse 12 onwards, these will have power with the beast. These 10 kings, the 10 nations of Europe, will have power with the beast for 1 hour. It's 30 years. So you see, when Elijah's got the Jews in the body of Europe, the next 30 years is going to be very, very intense warfare. As Israel is used, they're going to fight their way back to the land. That's what they will do over 30 years of intense conflict. They'll make their way back to the land, and in that process, the older generation will die out. The rebels will be purged out. They'll be brought back to the boundary of the land, baptised in the Euphrates or the Red Sea, brought into the bonds of the covenant we read in Isaiah 11 verses 11 to 16 and Ezekiel 20. Okay? And then they'll come up the valley of Achor, right towards the end of that 40-year period of judgment after Armageddon. Alright? That's the story. It's the story of the second Exodus. Well, Joshua chapter 8 is about all of those conflicts, but something incredible happens in Joshua chapter 8. Let me just show you what happens. I want you to come, have a look with me. I'm going to read from verse 28 of Joshua chapter 8. And Joshua burnt Ai and made it a heap forever, and even a desolation unto this day. What is the destiny of Rome? The fourth beast, the Roman Empire, what's its destiny? Daniel chapter 7 verse 11. The body of the fourth beast is burnt and destroyed. Gone forever. Right? So he makes it a desolation unto this day. And the king of Ai he hanged on a tree until eventide. What would you hang him on a tree for? Well, who is this guy that's led the opposition to Christ and the saints and Israel for nearly 40 years? Who is he? Well, he's the guy that goes around hanging on to a twisted cross. You know, cut down from a tree. Not manufactured in a factory. Twisted cross. Yeah, he's going to be hung on. He thinks he is Christ on earth. Well, he's going to end up like Christ, but unfortunately for him, he's not going to be resurrected. All right? Hung him on a tree. He's an imposter. Show him for what he is. Now, hang on, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Just keep reading. Hung him on a tree, verse 29. And it says at the end of that verse that he raised thereon a great heap of stones. So at the entrance of Ai, he raises a great heap of stones that remaineth unto this day. Then this is an incredible thing. What would you have written in this record? Or you wouldn't have written, nobody in this room would have written verse 30 in this record. None of you. Verse 30 says, Then Joshua built an altar unto Yahweh, God of Israel, on Mount Ebal. Huh? I thought we were at Ai. Well, we were. I thought the whole encampment of Israel was at Gilgal. You've got to go back down the valley of Achor and back down to when Jericho is a heap of rules. Yeah. Well, what's verse 30 doing there? Now, you've got to ask yourself questions like that. Because it's telling you something. It's telling you. This is not history. If it was history, you'd get a lot more details of what they did after they destroyed Ai and buried the king and etc. No. God doesn't want you to know that history. He wants you to know what comes next. And what comes next is that the whole nation is brought back into the covenants that God made to the fathers. That's what comes next. And that's why you read in verse 30 that Joshua builds an altar in Mount Ebal. Now I want to just explain to you what's happening here. As you can see from this note that's been up for a while. It is a dramatic development. The whole nation was encamped on the plains of Jordan at Gilgal. We read that in Joshua chapter 5. And in chapter 9, verse 6, you read the same thing again. All present at Shechem. You have a look with me at verse 33 and 35 of Joshua chapter 8. Verse 33 says, "And all Israel and their elders and officers and their judges stood on this side of the ark, on that side before the priests, the Levites," etc. Half of them, it says at the end of that verse, were on Mount Ebal, and half were on Mount Gerizim. So the whole people divided up, half on one mountain, half on the other. Have a look at verse 35. "There was not a word of all that Moses commanded which Joshua read not before all the congregation of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers that were conversing among them." Now, we've got a couple of families here. How much time did you have to spend to organise yourself to go from, if you happen to live in Tyler, Texas, to Joplin, Missouri? A little bit of time to sort of organise the motor vehicle and get all the kids in there and then travel? Yeah, of course. Cost you hours, didn't it, to get here from Texas or wherever you came from Abilene, I see some here. Well, think about the logistics of this. We're told in verse 29 that they put a great heap of stones at the gate of Ai, and the next verse says they're all up on Mount Ebal. What about the logistics? They would have had to go back down to Gilgal, say to their families, "Listen, pack everything up, take that tent down, get everything loaded up, we're going." Where are we going? We're going up to Shechem. Are we? That's 3 days' journey on foot, with all of these children and animals and everything else. And the whole nation has to go up to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, to Shechem. What for? Come on, give me a break. No, you're all going, because this was commanded. So what is this about, brothers and sisters? You ever thought of it that way? What is this about? Well, it's very, very important. They went to Shechem to renew the covenant. That's what they went there for. Where did Abraham begin his journeys in the land? Yeah, Shechem. And why are they here? Well, they're commanded to be here. And why are they on this place? Evil, bald, bare mountain? Well, it was the mount of cursing, wasn't it? And it says in verse 31, as Moses commanded. In fact, he commanded it twice. I'm going to take you to these records. Deuteronomy 11, 29 and 30. And Deuteronomy 27, verses 4 to 7, he says, when you come into the land, one of the first things you're going to do, Israel, is you're going to go to Shechem. Because that's where Abraham went. All right, you're going to go to Shechem. That's where Joshua brought all Israel in Joshua 24. What for? To make a covenant before Yahweh. That's what they went there. They went to make a covenant. Now I want you to notice something here. In verse 31 it says this. As Moses the servant of Yahweh commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, you'll build an altar of whole stones, over which no man hath lifted up any iron. Could I ask people in the audience what iron is the symbol of? Rome. Of course. It's the symbol of Rome. Do you know what this is saying? This is about Israel coming back under Elijah. They get to the end and they are brought into the bonds of the covenant. The Rome has been destroyed, largely by them, overshadowed by the saints. No iron lifted up on this altar. This covenant's going to be made without iron. No Romanism anymore. Got a picture? And it says they offered. Well, what did they offer? They offered burnt and peace offerings to renew their covenant. Burnt and peace, you know. You would have said, well, how about sin offering? No. They've already been offered. This people have been cleansed. They're going to rededicate themselves. That's what burnt offerings are about, isn't it? And what's a peace offering about? Well, it's about having fellowship with God. You know what? This is about covenant making. Verse 32 says he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. What for? Well, like Joshua did in Joshua 24, to renew the covenant. That's what they're going to do here, brothers and sisters. This is a wonderful type of all Israel being brought into the bonds of the covenant as a result of the work. Firstly of Christ after Armageddon with the refined third, that's early in the piece, but ultimately through the work of Elijah. All Israel will be saved, says Paul in Romans chapter 11. All Israel. Yep. That's what this is about. And they read out the law and they shout across that valley, Amen! With the blessings and the curses, Amen! In other words, they're committing themselves to it. That's what happens here. Whole nation gone up there for that, to renew the covenant. So, I want just to emphasise what this is. I want you to join me in Ezekiel chapter 39. Because this is the prophecy that's going to be fulfilled when the type of Joshua chapter 8 becomes a reality. No longer a type, but an antitype, the fulfilment of the type. Now, we read in Ezekiel chapter 39 these words. You see, back in Joshua 8 it talked about all Israel, verse 33. Well, I'm going to pick the record up from verse 25 of Ezekiel 39. Now, those of you who know the structure know that chapter 38 is about the Gogian invasion and the events of Armageddon. That the early part of chapter 39 is about the clean-up, the burial of Gog, etc. But then it has a section that deals with the 40 years of the work of Elijah. It has that section. But it culminates in this, verse 25. Therefore, thus saith Adonai Yahweh, now will I bring again the captivity of Jacob and have mercy upon, notice the words, the whole house of Israel. Yep. I'll be jealous for my holy name. After they've borne their shame and all their trespasses whereby they have trespassed against me, I want you to notice these words. Think about them. When they dwelt safely in their land and none made them afraid. When was that? In the few years prior to Armageddon, when they finally had peace. It's the time that they upset their God the most in all their history. That's a quotation of Ezekiel 38 verses 8 and 11. Dwelling securely in the land. Israel doesn't dwell securely today. They need an agreement with the Russians, which they're going to get. And they need to have the problem in Syria resolved. They need to get rid of Hezbollah and Hamas. Then they're going to have peace. Then they can take their wall down. All right? They haven't got that today. But it's coming. I want to talk about that tonight, God willing. It's coming. So, the time that they most upset their God in all their history is in that few years before Armageddon, when they dwelt securely and none made them afraid. So who's that about? Well, it's about the Jews in the land, isn't it? But this prophecy is about the whole house of Israel. So that's where it begins. It begins with the work of Christ, refining that third of Judah who survived. Right, but read on. Verse 27. When I have brought them again from the peoples, you can add an S to that word. It's a plural word. From the peoples and gathered them out of their enemies' lands and am sanctified in them in the sight of many nations. So who's this talking about? We know who verse 26 is talking about. He's talking about the Jews in the land prior to Armageddon. Judah. But who's this verse talking about? Well, these are the people in the lands of their enemies. This is the Jews who are outside the land. This is Israel, Ephraim, and the remnant of Jacob. Okay. Goes on to say this in verse 28. Then shall they know that I am Yahweh their God, which caused them to be led into captivity among the nations, but I have gathered them unto their own land, and have left none of them any more there. Neither will I hide my face any more from them, for I have poured out my spirit upon the house of Israel, saith Adonai Yahweh. All right? All of that was typified in Joshua chapter 8. Israel making a covenant. All right? They read all the words of the law. Now, I'm not going to take you back for time's sake. I'm not going to take you back to Deuteronomy 31. Go back and have a look at it. The context is the covenants made unto the fathers of Israel. All right? They're going to be brought into the bonds of those covenants. Verse 35, Joshua chapter 8, description matches that of Israel when they left Egypt in the second Exodus. So I'm going to take you back. I'm going to go back to Joshua 8 and read those words out. Joshua chapter 8 and verse 35 says this. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded which Joshua read not before all the congregation of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers that were conversing among them. What does that sound like to you? That's the description given when Moses led them out of Egypt for the first Exodus. Okay. That's the description given. All right, back in the book of Exodus. So here we know that this is a type of this people finally brought to the end of the second Exodus into the bonds of the covenant. Well, let's move on. Because the next chapter in Joshua is chapter 9. And this chapter is remarkable. It's the chapter about the deception played by the Gibeonites on Joshua and the elders of Israel. So what's it type of? It's a type of the Tarshish power submitting to Christ but feignedly out of fear. Just like the Gibeonites did. As we're going to see. These are the nations who submit to Christ and are preserved that they're compelled to labour in the temple as servants to Israel. That's what happens to the Gibeonites, isn't it? It's a type. It's a type of those nations who sensibly submit to Christ and immediately after Armageddon. I want to show you just how pure this type is. Look at verse 1 of Joshua 9. It came to pass when all the kings which were on this side Jordan, in the hills and in the valleys, and in all the coasts of the great sea over against Lebanon, the Hittite and the Amorite, are you counting these with me? The Hittite and the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite and the Jebusite heard thereof. How many? Anybody got the number? 6. 6. Okay. 6 is the number of man. What man? Well, man generally, but a very special man. In the scheme of things, his number is 666. It's the papacy, isn't it? So what we have here is 6 nations uniting against Joshua and Israel. Just like the papal nations of Europe will unite against Christ post-Armageddon. Exactly. Alright? And they coalesce around the Pope and initiate their false Antichrist theory, saying we told you so. Verse 2 says, and they gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and Israel with one accord. Yeah, well, I want to take you to Psalm 2. That's the underlined passage you can see on the screen. Psalm 2. Now I think many people understand this psalm, but not all. So let's just have a brief look at it. Psalm 2 begins with these words. Why do the nations rage, and the peoples, plural, imagine a vain thing? Now when is this happening? Well, the next verse says, the kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed. Anyone know what that word anointed is in the Hebrew? Yeah, it's Mashiach, Messiah, against his Messiah. Yeah, the Jews' Messiah. And they say in verse 3, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. Well, when will that be, you think? Well, we're told when it is. Have a look at verse 6. Yet, notice the tense, yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. Is Zion holy today? No. Will it be holy when it's cleansed of all the rubbish that's on it? When it's exalted by the earthquake? Yes. And the first thing that Christ will do is set the throne of David at the foot of it. Alright? The very first thing he does. Then the Jews come to him. One's his Sabbath. Alright? So this is past tense. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. Who are these fools? Of verses 1 to 5. Well, it's the Pope. It's the Pope who gathers all of his adherents and they rebel against the rule of Christ. They initiate their Antichrist doctrine. You know, the Jesuits put that together, didn't they? And these idiotic fundamentalist religions out there, Pentecostals, have sucked it up as, as though it's gospel truth. Well, it's not gospel truth. But they believe it's gospel truth. So when the Pope says, well, I told you so, there's that chap there in Jerusalem saying he's the king of the Jews, mind you, the whole world's in ruins. Sounds like he's got some power. I told you so, he's the Antichrist. And far too many nations will follow him. And this is a psalm about that. So what does God do? He laughs at it. Verse 4. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. And then it should read, it's one of the places where the sovereign changed it. Yahweh shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath. That's via the saints in the mid-heaven proclamation of Revelation chapter 14 verses 6 and 7. And vex them in his sore displeasure. That's Revelation 14 verse 8 onwards. Now, how do we know? How do we know that this is about Catholicism? Anyone got any evidence? Well, I'm going to give you the evidence. I want you to have a look at Psalm 2, verse 9. Well, verse 8 and 9. This is about Christ. He's the subject of verse 7. Ask of me, verse 8, and I shall give thee the nations for thine inheritance. Well, who's going to have the nations for his inheritance? It's obvious, isn't it? And the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. This is about Christ taking ultimately possession of all nations. But then read verse 9. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Anyone know where those words are quoted? Revelation chapter 2, verses 26 and 27. Right, that's where they're quoted. Let me read them out to you. Revelation 2, verses 26 and 27. And he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations. To do what, Lord? Verse 27. And he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers. Coming from Psalm 2. Even as I received of my Father. So hang on, well, where's the proof, you might say, that this is Catholicism? Well, who's he writing to? Thyatira. What was their problem? They only had one problem. And when it says in verse 20, notwithstanding I have a few things against thee, the word few things doesn't appear in the text. He's only got one problem with them. You suffer that woman Jezebel. So who was she? Well, she was the one who brought Baal worship into Israel via Ahab. Baal worship? Who's he? That's Cush and Nimrod. What had Nimrod found? The kingdom of Babylon. Where did Catholicism come from, brothers and sisters? From the brotherhood, through the influence of Babylonianism. Because Jezebel was in the ecclesia. Got a picture? Yeah, when you read Psalm 2, you're reading about the papal rebellion against Christ's rule after Armageddon. I normally wouldn't spend that much time on it, but I think it's important. It's important to see. And when we're dealing with Joshua chapter 9 and 10, wait till tomorrow morning. You think, this type's not there? Well, hang on, you wait till we get to chapter 10. In verse 2 it says they all were there with one accord. In the Hebrew it's ekad, which is one, pay, which is mouth. One mouth. Guess whose mouth it is? Right, it's the mouth of the Pope. Yeah. It's the papal mouth. The mouth that speaks, that delivers encyclicals and decrees. Verse 3 of Joshua, and we're back in the book of Joshua, chapter 9. Verse 3 of Joshua 9 goes on to say this. And when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done unto Jericho, so who might these represent? Well, these people are frightened out of their skins. They've heard all that's happened to Jericho and to Ai and to Bethel, and they think, there's no way we can defeat this mob. What are we going to do? We're going to have to submit to them. But do we want to become Israelites? No. Well, let's deceive them. All right? Let's try and deceive them. Now, this is actually a type of the Tarshish powers who will submit to Christ. We read of that Psalm 45, verse 12. The daughter of Tyre shall be there with a gift. That's a hint. I think that might be Queen Elizabeth. You know who she is? She's the head of the Church of England. Come to that in a minute. It's a carbon copy of Catholicism. All right. 72:10. Yeah. People of Tarshish will submit to Christ. Kings of Tarshish, etc. So this is a type of the Tarshish powers. The Gibeonites represent those powers who will submit to Christ almost immediately after Armageddon. Why? Because they can't defeat him. Their whole country's in ruins. All right. Millions, billions of their people are gone, rotting in the open. They're not going to try and fight this power. So they'll come and submit. Do you think they want to become Christadelphians? No. Just like the Gibeonites didn't want to become Israelites either. So let's go into this. Let's read on, verse 4. They did work wilily and went and made as if they had been ambassadors. Wilily? The Hebrew word means trickery or shrewdness. Rotherham says craftily. Young literal with subtlety. Yeah, they were deceived. It goes on to say they were ambassadors. They sent ambassadors. Now this word ambassador is very interesting. It's sayar in the Hebrew, and means to act as an envoy. Well, that's what an ambassador is, isn't it? Yeah. It's from the root zer, which means a pivot of a door or a hinge. It's an envoy or an ambassador, you know. An ambassador is someone you send to open the door, don't you? Open the door to peace or whatever it might be. And that's very interesting, isn't it? I mentioned cardinals earlier. Remember that? I mentioned cardinals. What's this what the Treasury of Scriptural Knowledge says about this passage? The word zer, the root of the word that is here, ambassadors, an ambassador, probably denotes a hinge. Because an ambassador is a person upon whom the business turns as upon a hinge. So the Latin cardinalis, from cardo, a hinge, was the title of the Prime Minister of the Emperor Theodosius, though now applied only to the popes, electors, and councillors. Now the popes electors, of course, are the cardinals. What do? Well, they open the door, and they go behind and they lock it. And they stay in there until they get a new Nimrod. Right? They elect a new Nimrod from amongst their own number. Okay? That's what they do. Well, where do they come from? When they go in that door, what colour garment are they wearing? Red. The cardinal's garment. Well, who started that practice? Semiramis, the wife of Nimrod. Yeah. And in Hebrew, what's her name? Shinar. Yeah. Where do they build the Tower of Babel? In the land of Shinar. Oh, I can go on and on forever. I'm not going to do that. Got a picture? See where this is taking us, brothers and sisters? You can see what's happening here, can't you? When, probably, hopefully, I say hopefully because if it is her, she's 87 years of age now, so Christ comes today. It's 10 years before Armageddon, she'll be 97. But her mother lived to 101, so there's probably time. We'll see. When and if the Queen Elizabeth comes to Christ to submit, you know what she said when someone said to her, you know that Christ is going to come and rule as King in Jerusalem? She says, if that happens, and she doesn't believe it, but if it happens, I will lay my crown at his feet. That's what she said. Right. So she's already said she's going to do that. Well, who is she? Well, she's the head of the Church of England, right? Which is a carbon copy of Catholicism. When Henry VIII forsook the papacy, it wasn't because he wanted to change the doctrines of his church. In fact, he cut people's heads off of trying to change the doctrines. All he wanted was the right to remarry, to divorce and remarry. And he did, what was it, 8 times or whatever it was. 6 times? Yeah, 6 times. So when she comes, she's the successor of Henry VIII, who established the Church of England. When she comes as a carbon copy of Catholicism. Do you think she's going to say to Christ here, here's my crown, now I want to become a Christadelphian? Come on. No way. Well, it's very important in the type because you see, what this chapter, Joshua 9, is telling us is exactly what's going to happen post-Armageddon when Britain and other nations come to Christ to submit to him. All right? This type shows, I'm going to show you it's not alone, not by itself, part of the scriptural message. This shows that the initial submission of some nations to Christ, the middle of Armageddon, is with deception in the heart, just like the Gibeonites. I want you to have a look with me at Psalm 66. Now, I take you here because I want you to see the context. You know, it's easy enough to just pluck a verse out here and there. You'd never do that. Always use the context. It's the arbiter of any interpretation. So in Psalm 66 verse 1 we read this. You just think about it. Make a joyful noise unto God, all ye lands. Does that happen today? No. This is clearly about what's going to happen post-Armageddon. It's the kingdom age, isn't it? Verse 2. Sing forth the honour of his name. Make his praise glorious. Verse 3. Say unto God, how terrible art thou in thy works. What do you think they might be referring to there? Well, I would have thought Armageddon would fit the bill. All right? How terrible art thou in thy works. It goes on to say, through the greatness of thy power shall thine enemies submit themselves unto thee. All the earth shall worship thee, and shall sing unto thee. This is clearly about the kingdom, isn't it? Post-Armageddon events. Well, have a look at what it says at the end of verse 3. Through the greatness of thy power shall thine enemies submit themselves unto thee. Now, some of you are going to have in your Bible the same margin I've got in mine. My margin says for the word submit, yield, feigned obedience, Hebrew, lie. So what have we got here? Well, we've got just one of two places in the Psalms where this exact same word is used. The other one is Psalm 18:44. And I would suggest if you're in Psalm 66 with me, that you need to jot down Psalm 18 verse 44 alongside of Psalm 66 verse 3. Because it says this. Now, I'm not going to go into lengthy explanation, but Psalm 18 is an Armageddon psalm. Okay? David wrote that. It's an Armageddon psalm. It's about the setting up of the kingdom by Christ. That's easily provable. It says this, as soon as they hear of me, they shall obey me. The strangers shall submit themselves unto me. So what is this word, submit? Well, it's the same Hebrew word as this word, kadesh. It means to be untrue, to deceive, to lie. Young Bible says, feign obedience. But the margin of the AB says, they will yield, feign obedience. That's exactly what the Tarshish powers will do. You know, the Prime Minister of Australia is a Catholic. If he happens to be in power at the time, we don't know that that's going to be the case. He's a Catholic. You think he's going to come along to Christ and say, you know, I'm thrilled with the way you've destroyed my country. You know, look at Sydney, it's a total ruin. Look at the coat hangers, gone. You know, look at the opera house. It's a heap of rubble. Maybe out in the ocean, who knows? All right? Well, I'm thrilled with the way you've destroyed my country. We can't defeat you, we'd like to submit to you. And I'd like to become a Christadelphian. Can you send someone to teach me the truth, please? You reckon he's going to say that? Of course he's not. And neither does the Gibeonites. They didn't want to become Israelites. They weren't interested. They just wanted to save their skins. It's all about saving their skins. So you see the type? Can you see this type developing? Yeah, well, let's hammer it down. Because when you come back to Joshua chapter 9, this is what you read in verse 4. Now this session's going on a bit longer, so you have to be patient with me. Joshua chapter 9 verse 4. It says, they did work wilily and went and made as if they'd been ambassadors and took old sacks upon their asses and wine bottles, old and rent, and bound up. Now what do you reckon this represents? Well, it's the old wine of Babylon. All right? Represent the old wine of Babylon to deceive. Then you read in verse 5, they got old shoes. Well, where do you put a shoe? Well, mostly you put them on your feet, don't you? What do you do with your feet? Well, you walk. Yeah, this is about a faulty, effete walk. Old shoes, falling apart like their religion. It says, clouted. Now this word clouted, tala, means patched. That's the character of later-day Protestant religions, isn't it? They're a patchwork. It says their bread, which is a symbol for teaching, is dry. All right, goes on to talk about this in verse 5. Their bread is dry. We'll listen to a few sermons and find out how dry it is. All right, got an idea? Confused is the meaning of the word gave. Primary root signified to be ashamed, confused, and hence dry. Well, most parsons are confused. Mouldy. The word means crumble. Yeah, it's just like Orthodox Protestant teaching. It's crumbled away. It's a shell of what it used to be. Verse 6 says, they went to Joshua and they said, you make a league with us at the end of the verse. This word league happens to be berith. You cut a covenant with us. Well, you see, Joshua didn't take this matter to Yahweh, and he and the elders of Israel were deceived. Christ won't be deceived. The truth is the only covenant Christ will make with the subject nations. So you see, he's not going to... That's where the type breaks down. Joshua was deceived. Christ will not be deceived. He's going to put them to work. Just like Joshua did, by the way. So the type continues. He will make a covenant with them, but it will be on the basis that they learn the truth. So when they come and say to him, now listen, we'd like to submit to you, but we'd like to stay as we are, and you'll say, listen, let me tell you something. you are going to become Christadelphians. Do you know that? I've got a few people here, immortal people, who can teach you all about it. They're going to come to your country now that you've submitted, and they're going to start reorganising you, rebuilding your nation, and they're going to teach you the truth, and you're going to get baptised into me. Got it right? Yeah, okay. No nonsense, please. Right? That's the way he will do it. He won't be deceived like Joshua was deceived. So what happens to these Gibeonites? Well, let's see what happens. Let's come to Joshua chapter 9 and read verse 16 onwards. And it came to pass at the end of 3 days, after they had made a league, a covenant, actually it's 2 words there, Kareth Bereth, that they heard that they were their neighbours, that they dwelt among them. And the children of Israel journeyed and came unto their cities on the 3rd day. Now the cities were Gibeon and Chephirah. Gibeon means a hill, by the way. Chephirah and Beeroth and Kirjath-jearim. Kirjath-jearim, of course, the place where the ark was for 20 years. It means the city of the woods. This Chephirah, that's interesting, isn't it? It actually means a lioness. And the symbol for Britain is? The lion. Yeah. Verse 23. Come down to verse 23. No, verse 22 perhaps. And Joshua called for them, and he spake unto them, saying, Wherefore have ye beguiled us, saying, We are very far from you when ye dwell among us. Now therefore ye are cursed, and there shall none of you be freed from being bondmen and hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. So what's Christ going to do to the nations who submit to him after Armageddon? Well, he's going to make them help in the building of the house of God. The pattern was set by Solomon, wasn't it? Solomon got 70,000 who went up, Gentile people, cutting wood out of the mountains, doing all the hard, heavy lifting work. It's exactly what Christ will do for the nation who submit. We'll get them to help in the building of the house of prayer for all nations. Isaiah 60 verses 9 and 10 spells that out. Tells us that Gentiles will come and help build that house. Yep. Verse 27 of Joshua 9 says this. And Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of Yahweh, even unto this day. And I want you to notice how this chapter ends. In the place which he should choose. Where's that? Where did Yahweh choose to put his name? Ultimately, Jerusalem. Started at Shiloh. Ultimately, the place of his name is Jerusalem. Where will these nations who submit to Christ end up? Building the house of prayer around the exalted Mount Zion in the city of Jerusalem. And will they be happy about that? Of course they will, because they'll be Christadelphians by that time. Just like these Gibeonites became Christadelphians. And when they came back from their captivity in Babylon, brethren and sisters, 50,000 of them, there were Nethinims amongst them. Guess who they were? Gibeonites. And they set about, with those who returned, rebuilding the house of God. Right? Talk about a type, eh? Talk about a type. So tomorrow, God willing, we're going to have a look at Joshua 10. It's a magnificent chapter. It's all about the destruction of the papal system. Babylon the Great goes down the gurgler in Joshua chapter 10, big time. And then we're going to have a look at Joshua 11 and 12 in our final study, which will lead into the emblems eventually. We're going to see that Joshua chapter 11, which is the last conflict in the book of Joshua, is all about the rebellion at the end of the 1,000 years. In such awesome detail that if you haven't heard this before, your jaw will be hanging on the ground. It's just that wonderful. So this book of Joshua, brothers and sisters, is not history. Prophecy. It's prophecy about you and me. You and me being involved in the redemption of Israel and the education of the nations, and guiding peoples in the building of the house of prayer for all nations. That's what it's about. And the good thing about it is that all the signs tell us, as we will just briefly review tonight, all the signs tell us that it's just a hair's breadth away.